Oh,
Okay, welcome everyone to the inaugural Fear the Sun podcast of the GM Academy. This is the first time we're doing this, so of course bear with us. This is a large launch and a brand of a whole bunch of other products that we've been putting out recently here in the GM Academy, and this is the brand new thing to be launched, the Fear the Sun podcast, and I'm really excited for it. Today we have special guest James Damato of One Shot Podcast, and I'm sure he'll correct me on how to properly say his name, but let's do a couple introductions. Of course, my name is Jim McClure, and I'm the rude host that apparently is introducing himself first. You know me from wonderful things such as of course, the workshops in the GM Academy, the forums, and one hapless player from Dungeon Do's and Don'ts. So let's look at our other panelists here that's joining me, and let's start with GM Keegan.
Oh, we're still going to put the guest at the very end. We
Absolutely
are
the guest at the very
ever.
end.
And obviously you guys agree because should always introduce ourselves because GMs always come first. I'm GM Keegan. I evidently like a lot of pain, so I started this community on Roll20 called Your GM Academy. And we are growing and growing and busting at the seams to a point that we figured, you know what, I'm not egotistical enough. I should put my voice out there too. And so we're starting this awesome new podcast, and we do have this awesome guy from another podcast is actually going to show us how to do it in a professional manner, and he's going to set us up and help us out.
And of course, who Keegan, which I believe the new title is, we're calling him the architect of the GM Academy. I like that before his name. But the guest of honor today, the man that actually knows what he's talking about as opposed to myself and Keegan, that would be James Damato. James Damato, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you. First of all, I want to point out that you got the name 100% accurate. A lot of people say Diamato, which is wrong, but it's Damato. And secondly, it wasn't rude to introduce me last. That was simply our marching order. And you've clearly made me the wizard of this podcast by putting me at the back and protecting me. And I appreciate you guys going through all the traps and spikes and monsters first.
Well, I will work harder to be ruder in the future then. But yes, and thank you, James. And you are, of course, the host of One Shot Podcast and a number of other projects, and we'll be getting into sort of some of the different things as we go through. So, James, thank you so much for joining us. Keegan, of course, thank you for being here. And Jim, thank you. You're always awesome. You're welcome. So, moving into the podcast, we are going to talk. We have a bunch of different stuff to talk about, but the first thing we want to jump into is community events. We've had a bunch of stuff going on around the GM Academy here in the last week. For those that have followed you, you've seen there's been a number of announcement after announcement after announcement. So, within the GM Academy, of course, the big thing that's going on this weekend is the launch of our website. Our new website, yourgmacademy.com, went live this weekend and is hosting all of pretty much the GM Academy content.
Now, look at since no new project is complete with technical problems, that our one little static thing popped up. Now it's gone.
Oh,
and now it's back. And now it's gone.
All right, well, static issues aside, what we have going on is it's there.
No, it's still there.
Can you go ahead and give us the introductions of what's going on?
Since I had no idea what the introductions was since we gave everything to Jim, so now I have to look at these notes that I'm pretending that I actually wrote down. You might just mute your mic during this whole part.
Now, I think it might be me somehow. Hold on.
Is it? Uh-oh. So we're going to figure anything and everything out. So everybody's looking at their equipment, and I guess mine's okay so far. I was actually reading the comments in the chat room, so I don't know where he left off. Yeah, I know, he was right. Exactly 20 minutes later, we had the exact same static glitch. Yay! I know that there are a couple things that we are looking forward to in the community besides our website. That we put a blog contest up there for people from our community. We have a really, really large community from Roll20, and we've given an opportunity to, like, a platform for their voice. And one thing we're doing is go to the website, vote for who you like best, because that could turn into a regular feature. At the very least, we're going to give them prizes away. And that will actually take you, that website will take you to several other things, such as the One Shot Podcast, our Roll20, and other different community events. and he's not looking as concerned anymore. So it looks like maybe all of it is okay. And are all the mics unmuted?
we are all sorted out. I have no idea what happened there, but it seems to be better.
Well,
you unmuted?
We are going to keep trying here, and tell me if I start start becoming an issue again. I think I talk too fast, and technology just doesn't keep up. We know this. Okay, so like I said, as Keegan was saying, the big event, of course, this weekend is the website. That is the number one thing that we've launched, and it's because our community has become significantly larger than probably what we expected at this early stage, and we've been hosted primarily on Roll20. And for those listening to this who have not checked out Roll20, I could not highly recommend Roll20 as a phenomenal site. It's where the GM Academy started, but we were running groups within Roll20 that were designed for 3 to 4 players at a table. And last time I checked, we were almost at 450 members. So it got a little hard when anytime anyone says one thing, all 450 people other get a notification. And I personally love going on and go, oh, I've got 21 new notifications this morning, so I have a lot of stuff to read. But alas, it became technical issues, so we wanted to improve and expand the community, and that has been the reason that we're launching the website. For those who have not got a chance to check out the website, again, yourgmacademy.com. Please, oh please, have a look at it, and you will see we are still very much going to be keeping with the Roll20 community. You'll see there's actually a web portal back into Roll20, so you can do all your Roll20 right through the website. It's all integrated. It's beautiful. I love it. Again, our architect, you can direct all of your questions, comments, concerns, problems, gripes, and complaints to the wonderful architect of the GM Academy. Haha, Keegan, I'm throwing you under the bus.
I don't think I ever came out of it.
Is the new big thing, obviously, that's been going on with the GM Academy. The couple other big things that we have going on, of course, we have the new show, Dungeon Do's and Don'ts. We had the newest episode come out Friday with the lovely Mina and Danielle running that program and showing within their own unique little way of common issues that run into GMs, and that will be a weekly show coming out on Fridays. We clearly have the new podcast, which is what we are recording, and I'm talking to you on right now, which will be another. Keegan, we doing this weekly, bi-weekly? How often do I got to talk to people?
Yes, I believe is the correct answer.
All right, so it will be weekly and bi-weekly, so that shouldn't be a production schedule. It's odd at all. So we will be going through all of that wonderful fun. And then, of course, one of the other great things to check out on the website, aside from we've got new forums are out there, we have a wonderful blog contest that's going on of some of the members of our community have written blogs, and the winner, whoever gets the most votes, will receive a set of the D&D Next starter set. So the new thing that's out will receive a copy of that. So please go to the website, read the blogs, vote, comment, do the whole thing, check out all the information, and yeah, I don't know. Did I cover all that, Keegan?
Let me check my notes that are blank. And yes, those are really good points. We talked about ourselves a lot. We introduced ourselves. I'm trying to figure out, have we elevated our own egos up high enough? No, probably not. But that's what next week's for.
There we go. All right. So moving right along, the next thing we want to get into, our first little segment here, is RPG news. What has been going on in the world of RPG? Because it has been a busy summer, and we are in like the full swing of all the conventions. We decided to do our launch, of course, on the same weekend as Comic-Con. We understand that we're bigger than they are, and we're taking a large share of the audience. But we felt that we've delivered a better product than Comic-Con. So, we apologize to the people in California, but we've got to do what we've got to do. But leading into a month from now is our world's big event. Of course, Gen Con is coming up, which for me is right next door and makes it really easy to arrive, as well as some of the other people.
You snake in the grass.
Well, James is my fellow Midwesterner that it's easy for us. So
yeah, we just drive, but still, you're closer.
I'm so close I can taste it. But of course, at Gen Con is one of the big releases. We've already had sort of a partial release with the D&D Next starter set, but the full Player's Handbook comes out at Gen Con, or I think maybe directly after Gen Con. I assume they'll be selling it there. And one of the things I want to talk about, of course, with the release of D&D Next, it has been a really interesting system, and I've been semi-puzzled, honestly, by their release schedule. It's sort of interesting. It's sort of, I don't know how to take it, because for those who don't know their release schedule, we have, of course, the starter set already came out on July 15th. The Player's Handbook is coming out on August 19th, which I think is Gen Con or right after Gen Con, as well as a pre-made adventure. And then a month later, we're going to have the Monster Manual come out. And 3 weeks after that, another pre-made adventure. And then another month, and the Dungeon Master's Guide's going to come out. So we sort of have this staggered release over 3 months of the 3 primary books, which I don't believe is how, I know they didn't do it with 4th edition. I'm not sure how they did it with previous releases before that. But I've been a little confused by this, because I myself as a game player, I mean, I've played a lot of D&D. I don't necessarily need a DM's guide. I could probably live without a monster manual, but if I'm really going to jump into this, I want all 3, and it's going to be 3 months before I get it, and I personally am looking at it realistically. It's probably not going to be until I can purchase all 3 that I'm going to delve into D&D or D&D 5th edition. Keegan, James, what have you been sort of...
Yeah, I've got a question.
Followed all that much?
I got a question,
Sure.
actually. When are they releasing their Tiamat adventure? Because if it's before the Monster Manual, I think I get it.
No, it comes after. Tiamat
That makes
Adventure,
no sense.
Monster Manual comes out September 30th. Tiamat Adventure comes out October 21st, 3 weeks later.
Oh, that's weird. That's
It's
really
a
weird.
odd schedule.
I can see separating the DM guide, maybe, because I see it as almost never necessary. It has very little crunchy information there, and it sort of teaches you how to use the game a little bit, but it's nothing that's essential for playing. You need a player's handbook to play at all, and monster manuals make it really easy to play. So I don't understand why you would stagger that.
Yeah, it's really, and I don't know if anyone out there, I haven't seen a justification of what the reason for the release schedule is, but it is kind of, like I said, it's kind of an odd release schedule. Keegan, have you been following it much at all?
Is there another big convention coming on later this year that I just don't know about? Because it made sense. For me, it sounds like everything's rushed and they just missed some deadlines. That's the feeling I get. It's like they are like, hey, it's coming, it's coming. We put this huge beta out for a long time. First, it was a quiet beta that you had to secretly sign up on, and then they just opened it up to everybody. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, a starter set's coming out just in time for Gen Con. And then, but we're not going to really give you the book until a lot later. And I think they just kind of missed all of their deadlines. And so they're like, well, let's just keep feeding people to keep this this hype machine rolling and keep everybody's interest going, because they usually do these big sets coming out each time. So the way I see the staggering is more of there was a little bit of some hiccups along the way, because they really, I think, wanted to nail it.
I see Gen Con as the big be-all, end-all release date, and I would actually be surprised if the Monster Manual and the Dungeon Master Guide weren't there already. Gen Con is when I expect every major release to come out. Sometimes a couple months before, but Gen Con, you have, at least in past years, 60,000 people at least are there. The most press that there is going to be about an RPG release is at Gen Con. When people who are professionals who are discussing what's the big new thing, they're going to be talking to each other in person at Gen Con. So I see Gen Con as, if you want to release something, you do it there. Doing it before then is okay, but it's really exciting if the first opportunity you get to get your hand on any product is by waiting in one of those ridiculously long engineered lines that they have.
Well, right, and I think you're exactly right, and that was, I agree with you completely there, James. It's odd to me, if you've got the RPG world's attention, you are Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, as many other systems as there are in the world, you are RPG. You're the public face of it, and you're going to do the release. why aren't you doing everything at Gen Con? And again, these dates aren't, as far as I can tell, these aren't, just speculation. These are solid release dates. And I'll be real interested to see, because as far as everything I can tell, it's like, yeah, we're going to have a player's handbook at Gen Con, but that's it. And I mean, yeah, I would feel gaming for 8 years. I've played enough D&D. With a player's handbook, I could run D&D, but I could never imagine a new player, someone who hadn't done tabletop before, being able to do that. And maybe they're looking to get almost further pre-testing done, and maybe they'll looking to change some stuff around over the months. I'm purely speculating at this point. But yeah, I do found it an interesting and an odd thing. So
one thing on that though, this is purely an outside perspective. I don't have insider knowledge or anything, but I think they got really stung by Pathfinder, and it created a massive divide between the 4th edition, the 3.5 guys, and Pathfinder was so huge and so all-inclusive that they lost a huge market share portion, that I think they're trying to just one-up that experience. And I think that's why they're being so particular with 5th edition, to try to roll it out just right. And I think that's why we see this weird trickle. But somebody actually mentioned in the chat that the Pathfinder guys did the same thing. They had about a month in between each of their major releases. But I don't think they're going to be copying another company. It doesn't make any sense. I mean,
I do. That's how the corporate world works. If you copy the successful model. Pathfinder.
Exactly. If one person does it, the rest. I mean, the Pathfinder angle is interesting, but they had their own weird little. They carved their own niche out of the market based on a void left by 4th edition. So I don't know if they're the standard practice, but like you say, James, if something works for one, it's easy to make it a marketing sales pitch at a corporate event to another. So you do have a good point there. So that's pretty much been what's going on with D&D next. So it's an interesting thing. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is, as I've been watching the release to D&D Next, as I've been watching a lot of, I'm a big fan of the Kickstarter projects, a lot of the independents. I know James Damato is a big fan of these as well, as we'll be talking about those from One Shot. And I've seen a bunch of these different ones come out. One of the trends that I have seen really develop seemingly in the last 2 years is this trend of releasing, not system neutral, but genre neutral games. A game system that can be used for anything. That you can run pirates, and you can run D&D, and you can run, space operas, and you can run whatever you want to run. And it's something that I keep seeing coming out more and more and more. And I scratch my head, because I'm personally not that style of gamer, or that type of RPG player. But it's a trend that I've noticed, and I'm really confused by it, because I go, if you have a good one, if you have a popular one, what are all of these others trying to accomplish? And of course, later in the podcast, we're going to get really into game theory. But I was wondering, of course, James and Keegan, if you had noticed this trend and what you thought about sort of universal systems. I see James is chomping at the bit there for it.
Oh yeah, universal systems, to me, at least if you're a newbie designer and designing a brand new role-playing system, it's your first one, and you're going after a universal system, I'm not a fan of it. Recently, I judged the Top Secret Games 2-page tabletop design contest, and there were a lot of wonderful games that were entered into that competition, and I saw many games that I desperately want to play, but a ton of them tried to be universal games, and in a 2-page format, that's insane. You just don't have the room that you need to hook somebody in with your mechanics. So you're essentially competing with a game like Fate, which I think is primarily the system that you'd be referencing there. The success I see in Fate is actually what makes me think what makes this trend popular. Fate is a game that not only do people love the core game, but there's a huge community of people who have been creating their own hacks for the system. There's no genre on it, so you get to impose your own genre on it. And there are so few mechanics in Fate base that it's easy to impose those mechanics. So that community involvement really helps spread the game system. It's the same thing when Wizards took 3.5 and applied the open game license to it. suddenly this community that had been a little bit underground, that was creating their own design for D&D elements, is up front and center and creating tons of content, and you need to get the core system in order to understand that content. So when I look at something like the Atomic Robo RPG, or like Endragor, or like Dresden Files, they're all things that you need to understand Fate in order to get. So you might want to take a look at Fate and buy all of their products. They're essentially selling dice for every system that spawned off of them, which is genius.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So James, are you proposing essentially that your belief is Fate did a good marketing strategy, and then a lot of new game designers are seeing, I like from a conceptual level, so I keep trying to copy it. Is that kind of what you're proposing on it?
I think so. Most of I'd say, of the games that I received for the competition, and the competition I loved because I think it was a great way to take the temperature of like the young up and coming design world. I saw people making Fate hacks, and I saw people making hacks of Dungeon World. So those are two gaming systems that you can infer people respect and people care about and are passionate about. And therefore, those are two systems that they want to emulate in their designs. They want to capture the spirit and the success of those games with their systems. So I think you have an explosion of these sort of more universal RPGs. Because we've had GURPS around forever.
Yeah.
And, with GURPS, it's so complete. Do you need another open-ended system? I think Fate was really smart in taking it like, no, let's instead of look at the mechanical elements, instead of trying to faithfully recreate physics and what the specific effects of all these things are with our universal system, let's manipulate the story and create a story gaming system that's light. And that's the same model that the Apocalypse World people took when they made Dungeon World. And I think it really, really worked for them. And a lot of young designers see that, like those games, and they make games like those games. Why you get a lot of fantasy heartbreakers is because everybody likes Dungeons and Dragons, so they want to design Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, right, and I think that's a lot of a good point. I mean, and that's what sort of my key to the question of you go, well, is there one big universal system? And I go, well, actually, there's quite a few. There's like you say, that I see the big three as and you mentioned them. You have Fate, you've got GURPS, and you've got the Apocalypse World, and it's derivatives, and a lot of these sort of become universal because of other people building stuff upon them, but they're essentially these universal systems. And I go, when I'm looking, because I get a lot of people, and James, I'm sure you're the same, especially judging contests and all that. I get idea pitches to me and say, oh, I've got this wonderful idea for an RPG, and reading the forums. And James, I know you're a fan of our RPG like I am. Our wonderful Reddit community, and I see all this stuff, and almost every time the first pitch is that this is a universal system that can be used with anything in any game system in any situation. And I literally sit there and go, those are checkoffs of things I don't want, because I want, at this point, it's no longer 1977. There's not one RPG in the world. That then I have to figure out how to make D&D 1 work with my space opera. I have every single specific and other big, huge generic systems, and I go, what can you provide me that I'm not getting in a different experience? And when we talk game theory, oh, James, me and you are going to go at it for that. I hope so. But let me throw it over to Keegan real quick. I know you're a Pathfinder guy, and I know you're a big gridless guy. Do you ever play any of the generic systems? What are your thoughts on it?
I would rephrase that and say I'm a gridless guy. I consider Pathfinder my compromise, and that was only because of how loose I like to GM versus how comfortable players are. But talking about the universal systems, I think we're going to hit its threshold very, very soon. I think people, with the whole market so bloated, it's going to get to a point where, okay, enough's enough. We're kind of system fatigued, and we'd rather have content. And so people are going, I don't understand why it's not allowed or encouraged by some of the major systems to just say, okay, well, it's enough. Let's go out and say, instead of or making Pathfinder, which was D&D. Why don't they just incorporate, hey, if you have a setting, an idea, and a story, bring that in, and we will market that. I don't understand why it's not used. If you think of the Unreal Engine, one company makes it, and 1,000 others are using that platform. So instead of just getting one of these systems that are already established and then putting a setting on top of it, I don't understand why that's not encouraged, because I think people are kind of getting fatigued. They're like, well, I play a system I'm already familiar with, but this is a way more interesting setting and I like the story behind it. And I think that's actually where it's going to start drifting towards, especially because of how big RPGs have just gotten in general.
Okay, and I think sort of the next step of this conversation is we get into what is the purpose of a game system. And with that, we're going to get to our next wonderful segment here, which is specifically focused on our wonderful host, or our wonderful guest. I'm the wonderful host. Our wonderful guest, James Damato of One Shot Podcast. And of course, we got an introduction at the beginning of the show, but I just want to give my own personal introduction to you. Like I said, James Damato runs a One Shot Podcast as well as Critical Success, which is a podcast that either do one-shot plays of various different systems, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there definitely seems to be a focus on indie systems from what I have witnessed, while I do think you hit some of the others. Anyone who wants to check it out, which I highly recommend, my personal recommendation, I don't know if he's going to shoot a different one, watch the Lasers and Feelings video. Part 1, Part 2. I was at work one day. I play normally music or podcast in the back, and I was crying laughing at how well that was and how well everyone got together. And if anyone really wants to look at GMing and dissect good GMing and the skills that go behind it, watch that podcast. Watch what James Damato did in that. It's fantastic. So that's my wonderful, nice intro for you. And like I said, that would be the first show I would watch. Not that any of the others are bad, but that Lasers and Feelings is a phenomenal introduction to the program. James, again, welcome on board. Of course, you've already been talking with us. How did you get involved with tabletop? How did you get involved to the point where you were on doing your own podcast, and then, of course, finally elevate to the massive levels of being on the GM Academy?
Well, first of all, thank you for that flurry of wonderful compliments. They sustain me. They keep me alive. I'm very similar to Dorian Gray. I have a portrait of myself that keeps me young and powerful, but it ages if I don't get compliments every now and then. So thank you very much for that. How did I get into tabletops generally? I got into role-playing in college. I actually had never played a game before I went to college. And the way I happened into it is there was a girl who I was very, very attracted to. She's one of the most beautiful people I'd ever seen in my life. And I was like, how do I talk to her? And somebody mentioned that she was playing...
I don't want to ruin the version of the story, but just so, because I'm immediately being thrown out of the version. You said you wanted to, most beautiful girl you've ever met, and you wanted to get to know her better, and this story is going to lead you into tabletop. Just so I'm clear.
Yes.
By all means,
it's a different world in my generation, Jim. Where, like, I got to thank you guys for laying a lot of the groundwork, because yes, I got into Dungeons and Dragons for the girls.
I am a rock star. He has a tattoo. It says rock star on one side and D&D.
That's the new T-shirt right there. I got for the girls. There you go. Have that.
Yeah. And you know, I got to talk to her. We dated for a while, which is wonderful. But today she's one of my best friends in the world, and I also left with one of the greatest hobbies that a person can have. And that's role-playing.
What system did you play?
It was D&D 3.5.
3.5, wonderful.
I was a half-dragon sorcerer. It was my first character. My GM was very, very liberal in what he would allow me to be, and I picked half-dragon sorcerer. And like, it was really from the moment somebody gave me a character sheet and it's like, you can create this character and do whatever you want with it, I was like, oh, this has me. And like my initial like, oh, I'll play this game and, you know, impress this girl and meet this girl, like that melted away pretty quickly once I realized how much I cared about all of this.
So again, just so I'm following, D&D, I came for the girls, I stayed for the dragons. Is that the summary?
Yes, that is a T-shirt.
Oh
sir.
my word!
That is
I know what's
a good T-shirt.
We are
Okay,
so doing that.
fair enough. I don't know what to make of that, but I'm with you. I'm with you. Okay.
It's a different world these days. It's no longer nerds huddled in basements. It's now nerds out in the open interacting with other nerds who happen to be part of a different gender. Yeah. So that's how I got into role-playing, and I fell for it hard. Actually, my first year of role-playing, in a huge contrast to the way I am now, I was like, D&D is the only role-playing game that I'm ever going to play. Because I thought, like, if I get any deeper into this, it's going to be a problem for me, where I will be playing it too much. But somebody showed me Shadowrun, and Shadowrun is essentially D&D and Blade Runner made a beautiful baby together, and it takes place in America, so it's even better. You can impose like all these crazy political things on it, and I was like, this is great. And the system that I get introduced to immediately after that was Feng Shui, the wonderful, or Feng Shui as Robin Laws. I'll talk about that later. That's a huge problem. I want to blow the lid off of that. But it was Robin Law's Feng Shui system, which is it's my favorite gaming system of all time. And after I got introduced to those new systems, I was just like, I want to try everything under the sun. And I graduated college, and I found out I had a lot less time to game. It became very difficult. I moved to Chicago to become a comedian, so most of the time I was, trying to do stand-up in clubs or in improv classes and, scraping by to survive. So I got involved in podcasting, and I do an improv podcast called The Overshare with my buddy Alex Manich, who I met at Second City. And we've been doing that for about a year when we got picked up by Peaches and Hot Sauce, which is a podcasting comedy network in Chicago. We do a lot of great podcasts and videos. And it's essentially a network that's modeled very closely after Scott Aukerman's Earwolf network. And in fact, The Overshare is very similar to Matt Besser's Improv for Humans. And it was for that reason that Pat O'Rourke came to me and said, you do these role-playing games. Like I had run a game for Alex at one point, a game of Dread. And he was like, they have this podcast on Earwolf run by Brian Posen called Nerd Poker. Do you think you could do something similar to that for our network? And it had never occurred to me that I could be doing D&D and like role playing for the entertainment of other people. Like I have all these skills as a performer, and they're great in game, and it makes it a lot of fun for me, and it makes it fun for the other people at the table who are into role playing. But role playing is one of those experiences that's really hard to export. You basically need to cajole somebody into playing with you for them to get it. And so I thought about it, and it was like, oh yeah.
I'm sorry. that really hit a point where you can continue the story. Is that we had a discussion in our forums for a long time about professional GMing, and you were really talking about a lot of the points that people brought up about how to expand what role playing really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's sort of what I was thinking about when I was like, can I even do this show? Because I believe very passionately in the power of role-playing games as a storytelling medium. And the experience of it is that you are the hero, and you're essentially writing a novel that writes back when you're role-playing. It's one of the most powerful experiences you can have in narrative. Grant Morrison talked a lot about writing comics like it was wearing a fiction suit. Like he would be able to actually physically interact with the imaginary people in these imaginary worlds that he was creating. And to me, I'm just like, he could be playing D&D. it's a more powerful experience than anything he's imagining in comics. But
right.
I think they're. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because you were at the perfect point where I wanted to steer, because everything you say, of course, about tabletop, when we're talking about game and getting involved in all of that, and all the games that you've played, you've taken this, and I know through talks with you that you have, of course, your own game that you are designing. We're talking about story and narrative. Mm-hmm. I believe the name is Epiphany of it, and go ahead and give me the elevator pitch about what Epiphany is.
Okay. So Epiphany is my first attempt at a role-playing system. In the process, I've been writing a bunch of other smaller ones to get practice, but I am a big fan of the Bill Murray classic Groundhog Day, where, if you haven't seen Groundhog Day, just watch Groundhog Day. There's no reason that any human being alive shouldn't see it. It's a wonderful movie. And I wanted to have a role-playing experience like that. I find myself these days watching a lot of TV and movies and going, how can I make that into a game? And I also collaborate a lot with Cap Murphy, who's my creative partner on One Shot. We basically run the show together. And I was like, one of the great things I love about collaborating with somebody is you come up with all these great ideas, but it's almost impossible to incorporate all of that into the game because only one person gets to GM. So I created a system where there are 3 GMs and 1 player. And the character in that, we call them the protagonist now. The protagonist is not an expression of different abilities they have, like in Dungeons and Dragons. They're an expression of different aspects of their personality. And they start off the game with these things called flaws. And throughout the game, you try to convert your flaws into virtues. And in order to do that, the 3 GMs, which are called fates in this game, and I want to point out there's another game that has a premise that is very similar. I don't recall the name of it right now, but it's meant to recreate Greek mythology. It also has a 3 GM system, and they're also called fates. But it has nothing to do with my game, and I found out about it after I started working on Epiphany. Please go seek that game out. It's a wonderful game. It's not like my game at all. So anyway, returning to it, these fates create a magical realist scenario, like, for instance, waking up and reliving the same day over and over again. And that helps reform somebody. It confronts them with their flaws and tells a story that evolves over time that reforms the character. So the entire basis of the system is character development. And I think in most role-playing systems, you come in with characters who are already fully formed heroes. And they might change during the adventure, but that's not the point. The point of the game for D&D is that your character stays the same. They get tougher, but they impose their views and their personality on the world around them.
All right, that's awesome. Let me ask you something, though, because now, of course, we're going to get into the wonderful discussion of game theory, and I believe Fiasco was probably the game you were referring to earlier.
No, not Fiasco, although
Fiasco?
We did take... Fiasco has an act system that's similar to ours.
Okay.
There's 3 acts in our game and 2 acts in Fiasco. But there's another role-playing system that truly does escape me, but it's about being a Greek hero. And there are 3 fates.
All I was going to say on it is if anything, and if my old writing coach would have told me anything, it's all about execution, not premise. And that's why we have a whole bunch of different RPG systems like we were talking about. It's all about execution. Now, here's what I wanted to ask you, though, because you make a really interesting point, and I wonder from a game designer standpoint how you handle this. And that is, what is the purpose of my game? What am I trying to accomplish for my players? Because obviously, and I'm going to say it right now, the cop-out answer is rule 0 with an RPG. Rule 0, have fun. If everyone's having fun, you're doing the game. I don't accept that as an answer.
That was going to be my answer, and then I was just going to do a mic drop, walk away, and you just finish the podcast. No, I have to think of something else now.
Well, because then I'm going to come back, and the people who of course, have seen my workshops will know the immediate thing I'm then going to tell them is it's not just, rule 0, have fun. Rule 0.1 is have expression fun. Rule 0.2 is have fantasy fun. Rule 0.3 is have narrative fun, and so on down the 8 kinds of fun. But of course, that's me. My question, though, is when you're designing a tabletop game, like you said, the point a lot of times of D&D, people are coming in with fully fleshed out characters. They're coming in with a certain expectation when you play Dungeons and Dragons. That I'm going to have a sword, I'm going to fight people, I'm going to slay monsters, I'm going to have that type of fun. From your system, what you're developing with Epiphany, it's obviously a different type of fun. What do you look at for like the objective to what kind of fun you want to have with it, and how you design that into your game?
Okay. Well, first off, I want to point out that system I was referencing is called Becoming a Hero's Journey. Uh-huh. And now that plug for that game that's basically competing with mine is out of the way.
Such a nice guy.
So there are 2 different schools of thought in gaming, I think, these days, especially in design. But like this division has existed between players since gaming started becoming a highly populated design medium. And that is traditional, or trad for the youngsters who are too cool to say the full word, which is like
I can't
D&D,
believe that became a thing. I've been hearing that all over the place, and I was like, what is this? And then I start to listen, I was like, I'm hearing this from people in the industry are saying this, and I'm like, oh, come on.
Just saying
trad. Really?
Trad
it's
sounds
that lazy?
So
it's not
stupid.
like you're texting. Come on, guys.
Trad is the name of a goblin, not a style of play.
Absolutely.
So there's trad gaming, which I have a deep love for, which is, your basic swords and sorcery adventures that are really more mechanic, tactics-based systems. And then you have this new wave of games that's not really that new anymore, called story games. And really, what does story games mean? All games tell stories. These games are designed with rules in mind that help players manipulate the story more so than a traditional game would. And that's something like, if you look at Fate is a great example of a story game, because your character's abilities are, how does my character manipulate the story? I have these fate points that help me change the story to make it better and cooler for my character. And so I'd say Epiphany squarely falls in the story gaming category. And it's really designed to help people emulate these stories that you see that's in this unspoken genre of film and fiction. Because Groundhog Day is one example, but another movie that is in the same genre that doesn't really have a name, I've come to call them Epiphany movies, is Stranger Than Fiction, or Big, or Bedazzled, or Freaky Friday. These are all movies where a weird, unexplained magical realism event affects somebody and changes their perspective and position in life, and reforms them from being a very flawed, sort of scummy protagonist to being a recognizable good person and hero. And that's what the game system is designed to do. It's designed to take somebody full of flaws and make them into a good person.
And I'm going to point out just an interesting note, I think on a personal level, an odd trend that I've noticed. Within comedian circles, the 2 movies I hear most reference are Groundhog Day and Stranger Than Fiction. And it must be something about those that perfectly... I agree. I think Groundhog movie is a phenomenal... I've not actually seen Stranger Than Fiction, so don't yell at me for it. But those 2 movies I hear all the time, especially from comedians, that they really... Louis C.K., of course, one of the big comedians, he says Groundhog Day is the perfect movie. It's literally the perfect movie from his standpoint. So, having that. But, one of the things I was going to ask you, I mean, I think that's a lot of good points as far as, the 2 different schools of thought as far as, whether you're gamey or whether you're narrative story. One of the things I look a lot with these different systems, especially within the narrative system, is how much power do the players have versus the DM within narrative story, because I believe within that there's definitely huge variances from system to system as far as who wields more of the power, or is it a dead even power. Obviously traditional tabletop as we know it, the DM really holds the majority of it. I mean, the what we see, he's setting up the scenario, he tells you what happens. Players, you've got cheats to keep him fair, but that's pretty much all of your stats are. Where do you come down, and what are your thoughts? Obviously your system has, you know, sort of a flip on that concept of you've got quote unquote 3 DMs and 1 protagonist, but you know, from your game standpoint and from other traditional game standpoints, what do you think of that concept, and what do you like to see with the difference in the power and the control between the players and the DMs?
Well, Jim, I'm sure glad you mentioned that, because that is one of the central mechanics of my game, actually.
That was an unplanned plug. That was an unplanned plug.
Yeah, it's amazing. I didn't even explain it to him beforehand, and he's just lobbing me these softballs.
I'm glad it works.
We were past the fluff piece, so I just want to get everybody to know that this is just a true discussion.
So, like any story gaming system, I looked at how I can gamify interactions in the stories that I'm seeing in these movies that I'm modeling it after, but also in gaming in general. And the core mechanic is based around a dice pool system that's similar to Shadowrun in that you have a D6, and if it comes up 5 or 6, it's a success. The bigger the dice pool, the more successes you get.
For one point, just because for all the GM Academy people, we see dice pool systems as Legend of the Five Rings systems, not as Shadowrun systems. So I'm sorry, I've got to give you that one correction here. The stack of books tell me I have to.
I'm merely going with the system that I was introduced to first.
No, I understand. I'm personally offended, but I understand.
So anyway, it's a dice pool based system where the player has their own pool and the fates share a pool of dice. And you're essentially clashing, rolling against each other. However, let's say you're the player, I'll back up and say you're rolling these dice because whomever wins that contest between the fates and the player gets control of the scene. If there's ever a disagreement or the fates are directly trying to influence the character's character sheet, then you need to roll for it. And whoever wins gets to determine how that plays out in the story. So the strategy is a little bit different, though, because let's say you're the player, you have a pool of 10 dice, you decide, this is an important thing, I'm going to take 7 of my 10 dice and use that pool on this. Once you've rolled them, those 7 dice then go into the Fates dice pool, and vice versa for whatever they have rolled against you. So you're exchanging dice in this game. And the power over who has more influence over the story fluctuates constantly between the fates and the player. Because if the fates want to spend a bunch of resources to get an important story moment and change a part of the player's character sheet, they know that all the resources they just used are going to go squarely into the player's control, and the player will have an opportunity to take the next story element. So I directly gamified that idea of whether or not it is a system that's controlled by the GM or whether or not it's a system that's controlled by the players. The whole game hinges upon that battle between player and GM.
Whoa!
Yeah,
Okay.
You made Keegan nervous.
I'll have a comment after you, Jim.
No, I was just gonna say. So I was gonna follow up on that. So it sounds like with that system, it's really designed for almost, I would imagine, a 50-50 balance in control over story between, in this case, protagonist and not GM, whatever you call the other side, the voices in the head, as it were.
The fates.
The fates. Thank you. So you're pretty much strive for a balance that, like you say, you gamify it so you you allow them to have that system of random chance, of fun, of what I would call challenge engagement that engages with story, which for, again, anyone who's listened to me, challenge and narrative fun, I always hold separate, and anything you can do to nudge those suckers closer together is expert game design in my book. But Keegan, you said you got very, very nervous with losing your control.
Yeah,
No, it's not nervous. It's I guess you can call it philosophy, viewpoint, or just the right way to look at things. I don't know. And so what it is that control balance thing, it's more of the terminology. The whole thing I'm listening to, and I'm like, okay, there's lots of great ways and ideas behind the system. I think that's an awesome thing you're making. And maybe I'm just getting hung up on some of the wordplay that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, no, I would like to hear. I would like to hear it to make sure.
Oh no,
explaining it.
He's being modest. I'm going to speak for Keegan and make him correct me, because
no.
He has to have his world, his dungeon, his story. It's Keegan, which I do think is a definitely respectable way to play. I mean, Keegan's not respectable, but that other people could make that a decent way to play. And I know that's his hang up, and I challenge you to tell me I'm wrong, Mr. Keegan.
Am I ever going to get out from under this bus?
Never, sir. Never.
Oh, gosh.
I'm not familiar with the bus, so you got to let me into the bus.
I'm constantly being thrown under it by everyone. Oh, well, at least it's on top of the GM mountain. That's all that matters. The view I personally hold is GMs are the universe, grandmasters of all things. And because it's the notion of control isn't a word that I use. I guess people identify me as that. But it's more of a building the experience, such as I don't do anything. I don't control the players at all. Whatever they do, I have absolutely no control over any whim of what they want to do with their character's story. But on the other side, they have absolutely no control over the setting and challenges and interactions that I present to them, because that's my responsibility. I consider that a GM's responsibility. But you brought up this, I think it was the word that finally kind of just like took me back a little bit, is I think you used the conflict or struggle or something between players and GMs. Is that right?
Yes,
I don't want to misquote you.
That's something that can exist in any game.
Okay.
Is whether you don't have to play GM as opponent, obviously, but some people do. And in Epiphany, the fates have personalities. It's almost like everybody's a character in their own way, because each fate has its own agenda. So you are playing an entity that has its own desires and designs, unlike the GM, which I will say, to back up your points, is more of this weird omniscient force that sort of creates the setting and like paints all the scenery so that they can, place the tiny characters in there and let them run wild.
Yes.
That is a role of the GM. I'm just taking a different take on that role. I think there's all sorts of things a GM can be, and different games play up different aspects of those roles to make them good or bad. Like Dungeon Worlds. Oh yeah.
No, I was just gonna say I agree with that, and we're gonna segue slightly here, not to cut you off there, James, but I think based on what Keegan and you, and of course I have a slightly different point of view, is we're going. There is different systems for different people, and different systems target different kinds of fun than other systems.
Right.
Like you said, if you've got Keegan, who's just the complete 100% control freak, no one can mess with my world, no one can do anything about it.
You're
Game Master, like he is, that like we all know that Keegan is, then you end up with systems that work for him. And then when you have nicer, kindler, gentler DMs that are more interested in telling a good collaborative story.
I guess there's a GM next to Jim that he's talking about.
What's that?
I guess there's a GM next to Jim you were pointing to. I couldn't figure out who you were gesturing to that was this coddling person that doesn't shatter dreams and hopes of their players.
No, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Keegan. But but my question to our guest, the important person here, Keegan. James is the important person, not your ridiculous playstyle. James is what we're here about. My question, James, you had mentioned feng shui earlier as your favorite all-time game system, which interestingly enough, at my local game shop, I actually ran across a hardcover of that, and I was like, that's mine, and haven't read it. But do you see some of these similar principles with feng shui? And as someone who is not directly familiar with the system, do you see some of that in what you call your favorite system, or what makes that your favorite system?
That is my favorite system simply because I really like a lot of crunch in a game, and feng shui is all about breaking your character. It has very light rules, and it's also very story heavy. So like it encourages you to it rewards creativity as well as being diligent in your power gaming. So one of my favorite abilities in all of Feng Shui is for the everyman hero type character, and that's allows him to use an improvised weapon and get +1 for using that improvised weapon, so long as it is a different weapon each time. So it's sort of like that Jackie Chan scene in a Kung Fu movie where he's, using a spatula, and then he's throwing a bag of flour at somebody, and then he's throwing tomatoes at people and using a ladder to like block people's attacks and whatnot. It rewards that creativity, and that creativity is what I love in role playing. But I also like my stats to matter, because I came from a brutal school full of horrible power gamers who would break the hell out of a system, and in order to survive as a player, you had to break your character, because if you didn't, the CR is 5 above what the CR should be for a party that you're in. So if you don't learn to play, you're going to die every session. So it's sort of a marriage of those beautiful things, and it gave me this play experience that was so pulpy and light while also being brutal and power based. It was just everything.
Yes, go on. I'm intrigued. I want to play this game.
you threw out a term there that has me completely fascinated here, and that was it delicate power gaming? Is that the sentence that you threw out there?
I don't know if I said delicate power gaming, but it's a delicate balance between power gaming and story gaming, which are two ideas that are pretty opposed to one another generally, I suppose.
Okay, because I was going to say,
I
if you told me that this system achieved delicate power gaming, then I was just going to leave the podcast right now and go grab that book and read it, because I should have done that a week ago. Because it's, and I understand you're going to vote for it, but I found that term so fascinating, delicate power gaming, and now I want to play a system that just does delicate power gaming and figure out what that means. I'm fascinated.
It does make power gaming easier. I can't wait. Robin Laws, who created it, he also did the gumshoe system. He did a story system. He did some wonderful role-playing systems. And the Feng Shui model sort of picks up on. It's the only game that he did that really picks up on everything that I love about gaming, because I love so much all of the different kinds of fun that you mentioned. That's why I'm at the table. I love to be tactical. I love to be pulpy and silly, and I love to have a good story.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, there's precisely 8, no more, no less. Just so we're clear.
That is so
for my arbitrary distinction, but no, there's only 8. Trust
I cannot wait for that topic.
Well, your different kinds of fun actually makes me think of Robin D. Laws wrote a book called Robin's Laws for Good Game Mastering, and he breaks down players into different player types, and those player types are essentially tied to the different ways you would play or gain enjoyment from a game. So we're operating on a similar dialogue, but we don't have the same terms.
Well, wonderful. I was going to say that I actually have read that book, and it is a good book. And man, the guy got close. He almost had it. No, I honestly do this. When I look at what he has written down.
Oh, the hubris in that statement is palpable. I love it.
When I actually break down and look at it, I go how he breaks down the different gamers. Like you said, the power gamers, all the different ones that he does. I actually look and I go each of those archetypes within the 8 kinds of fun that I propose. And again, for those listening who have no idea what I'm talking about, go watch the GM Academy workshops on the yourroll20.com, right? What I see from them all when I actually break it down is I go, a power gamer is frequently just has challenge as his highest type of fun, and then, a sort of different ones. A lot of times they'll do expression, sometimes discovery, sometimes fantasy. And you can sort of break down. I see everything that he's done as, and again, like I said, there's wonderful hubris in it. I think it is actually a great book and a great read. But there's lower building blocks than just archetypes of players, and archetypes come from the combination of these other building blocks. And over the last 6 months, I have been personally really, really obsessed with this concept of playing both playing and designing games, because honestly, I see GMing in itself as game design. You are given a toolbox, which is a system, and you take that toolbox and you design a game with it. And just as a quick side note to do some housekeeping, ladies and gentlemen, it has been our first hour, and we are concluded, I guess, here at this point. Although, because we are having such a wonderful, lively discussion here, we are actually going to keep this thing rolling for another hour. So whoever wants to stick on, we certainly welcome you to do that. Post your questions down in the chat. We'll certainly get to some of those, and we are going to keep our discussion going here. But going back to it, James, I mean, I've been obsessed with this concept of the 8 kinds of fun and how to design certain elements for games specifically to work that, and kind of, I mean, again, different terminology, but like you were saying with your game, you're trying to add game mechanics to storytelling. Which I think ultimately is what a lot of people strive for within a system, what a lot of DMs strive for when using a system, but a lot of DMs have a really difficult time achieving. How do I get good story out of mechanics? Because it's not as easy as it necessarily sounds. I mean, I think I talk to DMs all the time, within the GM Academy, about different issues that they're having. And of course, again, you're a fellow RRPG fan like I am, and you see advice posted and questions there all the time of, I've got this thing and I'm doing this and it's not working. What do I do? Why is it not working? And it's a real issue. What I wonder to you from a game designer standpoint, from a person that is making a system that someone else is going to take the tools and then make fun happen with it, what do you look at for how to, obviously your core examples of your basic, you've got your 3 fates and you have your protagonist, but what stuff do you look at that will help the sort of the end user, the GM that's running it? Yours is a little non-traditional, but the players that are using it, what tools do you give them within that system or other systems that you play, whatever you want to talk about, that really help them achieve that story from mechanics? That's
such a great question.
Thank you.
I think about this a lot. This summer, recently, for all my love of gaming, I'm not super deep into the Google Plus community yet, and I got invited to my first game in something called Flail Snails, which is this weird universal gaming philosophy where you make a level 1 character in any system, and you play in a game, but you can take that character and take it to another Flail Snails compatible game, which is run in a completely different system. And you have approximately the same stats that you're allowed to build, but you're allowed to keep all of your magic items. So you could make a starting Shadowrun character and then bring that character to AD&D. So long as the GMs have agreed that this is a game that is Flail Snails compatible, that is part of Flail Snails. And the reason I bring up Flail Snails is it's the first time that I got to play like really old Dungeons and Dragons first edition. I had played second edition. I obviously played 3.5, but I had never played the original Gygaxian chainmail style gaming. And that is very different from the gaming that I normally do, where I'd say the world does not care about your character even a little bit in AD&D. You can die at the drop of the hat and probably will die. You have to be clever and you have to navigate through dungeons, and it's a lot more mechanically based. It's a more mechanically based type of fun. And stories sort of evolve out of that by accident because, originally these were wargaming. That's how we got role playing, is people were wargaming and they decided to play one character. And it turns out that character does things outside of combat occasionally. And stories sort of crop up around that. In story gaming, you're thinking of the story first, and you're trying to gamify the story. So the tools that I give players, especially for Epiphany, in Epiphany, I'm deconstructing a genre. So I watched a ton of movies that fit within this genre. I read a ton of stories that fit within this genre, like Midas and Scrooge and all of that. And I'm like, what are the beats of these stories? What are the major moments? If I was to chart this story out in my game system, can I make every major interesting moment happen? And then my second thought is, how do I make it easy for people to do that by accident when they play my game? Because it's hard to do something on purpose that's like a really ambitious story. That's why a lot of people have these heartbreaking campaigns that never come together in the way they want, because it's really difficult to do that. But if you just let the game sort of happen and you find those moments naturally, it's easy and fun to do. So I made, like, one of my mechanics is in having the Epiphany, which is the point of the game. It's a mechanical thing. It's a realization about your character's life and how it's gone and what was wrong with it and why it needs to change. And the way you generate an Epiphany is by tying it to something that happens in the first act of the game called the Hall of Victory. And the protagonist's goal in Act 1 is to just be an irrepressible bastard. Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, playing Phil in Groundhog Day. The first thing he does with his crazy powers is he tricks somebody into sleeping with him. That is like one of the first things he does. So he has these flaws that he indulges. And in that moment, when he slept with that person, that's a Hall of Victory. So in Act 3 of the movie, in Act 3 of the game, you'd look at that negative interaction and he'd realize what was wrong with that and how he can use that to reform his life and himself as a person. So in order to make this really cool connected story that's very strong and supported thematically, you operating within the rules of the game, you do that because you have to use this to get this.
That's really, really interesting. I like that essentially almost the 3-act structure, and you know what I know from the traditional beats of this 3-act structure, it is actually essentially built within the mechanics of the game that you are going to follow through with that from a story standpoint. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I really, really love that concept. Let me ask you something else. With your game, then, is there like essentially a set up time frame? As in, is this a game that's going to be played beginning to end in 4 hours, and next week it's a different story or a continuation of that story? Is it one that's designed for one play session for one act, or is it to a degree semi customizable in length like that? I wonder, because when you're sort of specifically talking about hitting the 3-act structure, I wonder if that comes with a sort of expected time frame of a campaign.
That is what I'm working with right now. At Gen Con this year, we're going to be launching an open beta test. I'll be passing around beta packets to anybody who shows up to the games that I'm running at Gen Con, and the few game designers that I really want to get it in front of because I want feedback from them about it. So The timing of the game is the one thing that I haven't worked out yet, because you need a lot of playtesting to do that. And before I go to market with this, before I try and put it up on something with Kickstarter, I want to make sure the game works. But right now, the game clock that we've tied it to is how many flaws the protagonist has. And the playtest packet is going to have 2 flaws standard, and it'll give you the option of playing with 3 flaws. 2 flaws, I have the feeling if you have a good 4 to 6 hours of play, and everybody sort of knows the rules and knows how to play, you should be able to play an entire character's 3-act arc in that time. With 3 flaws, you can take a lot longer to explore the characters. What I don't know, because I haven't play tested it enough yet, is whether or not the game will be effective if you leave a story and then come back to it at a later time.
Okay.
And
let me follow up with that, and then I want to get a little bit back to story mechanics, just because that was really interesting, and of course I got to pitch L5R again, because apparently I should work for these people. But I swear I've sold more books than they have. The thing I want to ask now, within, I know obviously One Shot Podcast, you frequently run, essentially one shot campaigns. We get them, sometimes in 2 parts or maybe even 3 parts, I think some of them. But we're running traditionally one shots. When you play for yourself, when you're the cameras aren't on, when you're not on a podcast, when you're doing it for fun, if you still have time to do it for fun, because if there's one thing I've learned launching a website and doing all this projects, all that time for game time, like this fun, just starts slowly disappearing. But when you do get a chance to play for fun, do you do traditionally one shots where you're trying to cover a 3-act structure within it? Do you do longer campaigns? What do you personally do when you're GMing?
So a lot of things. In addition to the games that I run on I run on One Shot, I am running or playing in 2 or 3 games at the same time. Right now, I'm running a Dungeon World campaign, and I am playing in a Traveler campaign, and those are much longer form games that are made to be expressed in campaigns. I am also going to be starting up a new show coming probably late August, early September, called Campaign. You can guess what that's about, where we'll be doing longer form games, because you're absolutely right. The way you play for a one-shot, as far as story and character arcs and everything, is dramatically different than the way you play for campaigns. And I'm really looking forward to being able to sink my teeth into, on air, some of those longer character arcs. And, having an experience where people can see how you develop a character over time, how you challenge a party and confront them when things aren't going to end when the camera clicks off. I do generally play campaigns, but if I can, there's some nights I'll put a call out on Facebook. Hey, if you want to play, come play, and we'll do something.
Okay, and that's interesting, because one of the things that I personally am really a big proponent for when I play myself, for my own enjoyment, for my own edification, I am addicted to the long form storytelling. I'm not saying I'm opposed to one shots, but when I personally play, one shots have their place. They're good. They're a lot of fun. People laugh. People have that fun thing everyone talks about. But I am, from the 8 kinds of fun, I am narrative. I am 100% top of the board. It is narrative. That's what I enjoy. And I enjoy narrative being played out from a long process. And when I, design my campaigns, and of course we just did the big plot designing workshop special. But when I design my campaigns, I've almost fallen down into, I design them for 4-hour play sessions, almost exclusively. And I literally have each play session as one act of the structure. I have a personal issue with the 3-act structure. I believe it should be a 4-act structure, but it's minor minutia that's just my own personal literary nonsense that gets me on. Because I believe your first act is your information, your development of your story. Your second act is the rise of the heroes, where they're figuring out everything's going right for them. Your third act is the villains strike back, and your fourth act is your finale. And I literally set up my play sessions of each of these are 4 hours blocks of that happening. And I have found it works phenomenally well. And that's generally what I run because I like narrative. And then the next story will be the same people with another 4-act structure. And from a GM standpoint, of course, it's relatively easier to run that because I get to design everything. I get to run 4 weeks, and then next month I get to design something else for the guys. So I've always kind of like running like that. And that's why I was curious with the time frame of your game, whether it was designed specifically for, sort of one-shot environments, or whether it was designed for something that could be expanded or contracted, on that side of it. Let me just, because Keegan's been quiet and I've got to get some ammunition to throw back at him. Keegan, I know you've got long-running games. Do you plan out story arcs? Do you plan out, certain things, or do you fly by the seat of the pants? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's pretty much at my whim. When I'm like, what'd be really cool? We're doing that. Somehow I saw somebody talk about underwater in one of their games, and I was like, oh, how am I going to get them underwater? That's all I want to do. It'd be really fun. I'm going to put them underwater. And so I was like, I don't want to do it too long. Let's just do 5 weeks. Okay, so we did 5 weeks of it. Actually, I think it turned into 4.5 or something like that. It's more of I do... this is the longest running one. I don't do long run campaigns. I have a big story and say this is the finale, and everybody gets pushed towards it. So I don't have the exact little, I guess you do a 4-week structure, 4-session structure. For me, it's what are they doing and how does it play out. My pacing's based on what they're doing and how they're doing it, because I can adjust from time to time whatever's happening. If it's like, okay, this is probably about 4 weeks until we get to this interesting conclusion of the story, but it takes 6, well, then it takes 6 because they were doing something really fun and engaging. I improvise my campaign as much as I do an individual session. So I couldn't give something so hard fact. Like I know some people, I was talking to a GM that says he has seasons. Each season has 10 episodes or 10 sessions. That's what it is. And he knows how to structure it and how it's going to play out. He tells his players that it's going to be 10 episodes, and that's how they run. And it helps them understand the whole progression of story. I'm not as structured, and it may bite me in the butt sometimes. Of like, wow, this got way off base. How am I ever going to get back to the story? But for some reason, they keep sticking around every week. So I guess there's some moderate success happening there. But I'm not nearly as structured as some people.
All right, I gotcha. Because one of the things that I talk about a lot that I'm always concerned with when we're talking about narrative story is I hold that us as society of human beings have figured out how long humans can maintain an attention span for one story. Now, some would argue George R.R. Martin has thrown that out the door. I argue he's not. But the concept is within a TV show, within a season of a television show, it takes, somewhere between 10 and 12 hours. It's the same amount of time to read a book. It's the same amount of time to watch a movie trilogy. It is how long us as human beings can hold our attention. And I hold things at tabletop play out a little slower, just like things in the movies play out a little faster. And I hold 15 to 20 hours at the game table is the maximum time that players can play without needing a finale, needing a sense of conclusion. Yes, the story will continue. Yes, there'll be more for it, but we in society have figured out there is a maximum time. Now, this rule is by no means hard set. I don't mean to say that. I generally, when I do what I call my finale of finales at the end of the year, which is, sort of all of these four-act structures we've done, 10 of them throughout the year, and then we do a big one. Those can be 8, 10 play sessions and end up being longer. So it's by no means a hard and fast rule, but I always concern myself with games going too long because you don't get that sense of conclusion. You don't get that sense of finale. And if players don't get that, then they can run into issues where they just get player burnt out. Nothing's happening. Nothing's progressing. Obviously, Keegan, it sounds like everything's working out for you. And that's why I was most fascinated, James, when you said with your game system, essentially, no matter what that time ends up being, there's almost a definitive endpoint. we are working from a beginning with a clear concept that there will be a conclusion. You know, sort of period. Yes, there could be another story, perhaps with the same people after that, depending on how it's structured. But it is start, and we know we're driving to a conclusion. And I kind of wonder, is that, you know, a directly intentional thought process, and sort of what your thoughts are on the 10 minutes of other crap I just spewed.
That's interesting. I think there could be, but it's not because I've been doing one shots so frequently. I think it's because I was trying to emulate a genre that depends on there being a definitive end. If you're going to tell a story where you have to reform a character and you're taking a character from one place and you have another place you want them to be, you have to have an end point for that. So that's what since that's the genre I was going after, that's what I'm doing in designing that system. I know my creative partner is going to kill me for mentioning this. Sorry to Kat.
Mention it. Come on, mention it.
Once Epiphany is done, and once we have the Kickstarter done, and we hopefully sell the book, the next project that we want to work on is a superhero role-playing system. And in my mind, that never ends. Superheroes go on and on forever. And you never have a fully defined arc unless you're doing something that is a riff on a superhero and not an actual superhero story. So while Epiphany has a definitive start and a definitive end point, I think the next system that I work on could theoretically be played forever.
Okay.
And that's interesting.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Because I really think this whole discussion has an asterisk on it. Is because we're kind of like debating just building proper structure, which is all good. But the asterisk is it's not a movie. It's not a TV show. This is a social gathering between friends. Most of the time. Now, granted, you can do these pickup games. You could do one-shots. You could do things where there's loose relationships. But I got to say, honestly, 80% of all role-playing games going on are between people that know each other and are friends outside of games. So it's not just structuring that has to be taken into account. We're sitting down with people that we like long enough to do this on a regular basis for more than 2 times. So we're like, hey, let's do this again. Let's do it again. And it keeps on going and snowballing. So that's why this one being so long, the one I have now, obviously I built relationships with these people. They started one way and then they developed another. I mean, that we have connections now. I think that's awesome. So just as an example, a recent game I had, I was like, okay, this is the structure. This is all the cool things that they get to experience this night. 4 hours. It's going to be great. They spent the first, what I thought would be only 20 minutes. We spent 3 hours doing this one scene because it snowballed so far out of control. Everybody was laughing, and I still got to give them the little clues and move the story. And there was lots of little things in it that they enjoyed that will develop later on for the rest of the arc. But I was like looking at my notes like, well, at least I'm prepared for next week because it's all laid out. And so that's why it's this, I think this is a good idea and goal and to structure because, there's story and it helps with pacing. But I think in the end, most games are going to have this asterisk of we are just playing with friends.
And I think you're right to a degree, and actually one of the questions we had on the chat kind of applies also similarly to what you were saying. And one of our people, they said, one of the biggest lessons I've learned about campaigns, think in terms of an outline because your players will unknowingly circumvent any details you come up with, which of course is a common thing, and sort of to what you were saying, Keegan, you can walk in with all the plans in the world, but as you're developing these relationships with people, as you're doing it more and more, you are going to get deviations from a planned event. And I come down on a side of this argument that not many other DMs do, I feel. And I rarely, as odd as it's going to sound, have players go off of what I have planned. They follow it very, very well. And the reason is I personally hold, and again, here we go with some of Jim's wisdom here. I personally
hold on. I think your wisdom just went straight into static. We don't want to lose any of the wisdom. Do a little test. Do a little. Is the mic working now?
Okay.
No, it's not. That wisdom is just being destroyed by the internet. I think the internet is attacking your wisdom right now.
That people, the powers that be don't want it to get out. It's a scary thing. I get it. I understand.
They are constantly attacking you, Jim. I don't know why. They've done it a couple times. They were like, no, crush Jim's wisdom.
That's so weird.
It just so randomly pops up.
So one thing that I want to talk, since we're talking about structure, and we'll come back to Jim as soon as you resolve that mic issue. The first campaign that I ran was after I had taken my first improv class. And I think the most important lesson that improv teaches is not the universally quoted yes and, because that's a little bit confusing if you don't have the time to absorb the context for it. And it's that you're not supposed to say yes to everything your partner says to you. You're supposed to make what your partner says to you important. And a good GM looks at their players, looks at the decisions they're making, and it's not like, oh, every solution that you come up with is a good solution and that's the way to go. It's to make the decision that they made important. I was talking to my buddy who's a huge proponent of first edition D&D and who introduced me to these Flail Snails games. About the Dungeon World episode that I ran, where one of my players, I had them talking to a ghost, and they were asking the ghost, what's the right way to go through this dungeon? And the ghost said, well, I went down that way and traps killed me, so you probably shouldn't go down that way. And my player, using the Dungeon World's rule set, looked at me and went, I choose to go down the direction he said was trapped, because I know this ghost is trying to trick me because he's lonely and he wants me to be dead too. And so he walked down that hallway, and I'm like, of course, in my mind, that's the best solution. That's such a great decision, because he added these layers of story elements onto it and made it like a story that you would hear in a fable. And my buddy is like, well, that's all well and good, but had he been playing AD&D, he would have walked down that corridor and been horribly maimed and murdered by traps. And both decisions are right, because ultimately it makes that player's choice important. No matter what, like, the party would be talking about, I can't believe you had the wisdom to make that decision. You're so good and cool, Baby Blues, versus you were so sure of yourself, and then you got maimed and murdered, you stupid idiot. And they're both ridiculously fun ways to play.
Right, and I think hopefully my microphone is back in working order now.
Yeah.
And that sort of ties into exactly my knowledge of wisdom that someone in the internet's trying to censor. And that is that I hold players will try and interact with the most interesting thing in their environment. And if there is not something that is interesting up to a certain level of interest, if there is nothing that exists, then they go off the rails and try and find something else. Then they start doing craziness. If you are providing them as the story interest, the most interesting thing in their environment, they will follow it. Where people really get in trouble is when they do one of two things. They want to do a true sandbox and give no direction to players. And then they have no reason to be invested in anything, and they wander and do nonsense until something interacts with them. Yes, really good players, most of the time when it's GM players, will take super initiative and get into it and tell great, fantastic stories. But players, the average player, is going to go and interact with the most interesting thing. The other way people get themselves in trouble not doing the sandbox route is to do the route of, here is the dragon that's 10 levels above you. You're not allowed to touch him yet, or his pile of gold. You have to do something else until you level up. And the problem is, the dragon with all of the gold is the most interesting thing in the world. I want to touch it. You can't tell me I can't touch it. I'm going to touch it. And that's where a lot of people, when they go, it's hard to write a story because players will always change it up. I I personally, and again, I'm not saying that this is the way to the whole world and this is how every GM should be. This is my personal opinion. If you are writing a tight, cohesive story and understand the elements that you are presenting to your players, they rarely change those up. They will engage with what is most interesting, and you should be presenting them as the story, the most interesting thing. Now, having said that, I have to then tell a story of when I did everything right, and then the players didn't follow the most interesting thing and changed everything up because no one's perfect. And I'll just be super quick with it with my L5R game. I have a long-running 3-year L5R game, Legend of the Five Rings, greatest system ever made, yada, yada, yada. And within this the system, what we had is they went out to the Shadowlands where all the bad creatures are. They met the big bad villain, Daigotsu, for those L5R players know who I'm talking about. And they met him, and he did dastardly things, mainly because they mouthed off to him. And he then explained how he was an original descendant of the hentai bloodline, the original emperor, and he should be rightful emperor, and all of this stuff to prepare that they were going to have to run back from his Oni army and defend the wall, and yada, yada, yada. And to my shock and awe, despite every other thing that should have happened, they listened to him and said, he's got a good point. Let's bring him into the Empire. They had no reason to believe. He's a dastardly lying guy. They've seen it through story that he's a liar, he's a manipulator. But for some reason, his story, they went, okay, we buy it. And literally, on a dime, turned from a good campaign to an evil campaign. And we, for 10 months after that, followed them as agents of Daigotsu and infiltrating Daigotsu into the army. And it went completely off. So I will say, with my big statement of knowledge, that no matter what the players, yes, it does sometimes happen. And as a GM, you do have to roll with it. But I personally hold that if you're presenting your characters with the most interesting thing, that's what they're going to interact with.
That's certainly a good way to insulate yourself from most surprises. I talked about this on Critical Success a while back, but the problem of invisible levers. If a party walks into a room in a dungeon and they don't see anything, then they assume, well, this is a useless room and you're a bad GM because you haven't given me anything. You were merely trying to obscure the challenge and make it more difficult for them to find whatever they have to interact with. But if they don't have anything to go on, they'll assume you didn't provide them with anything, no matter how ridiculous that assumption is, and they'll create their own thing to interact with, and you'll spend the next 5 sessions learning how to mine through walls as they try to dig through the sheer rock of the dungeon, completely ignoring your puzzle.
Right, exactly. I was just going to say, there wasn't something that was directly interesting then. Like you said, they walk into a blank room, so what are they going to do? They're going to make something interesting happen. You know, it's, all right, we're at this room, there's nothing happening, I don't see any levers, I don't see anything, all right, I'm not searching for a lever, I'm grabbing the pickaxe out of my toolkit and we're going through this wall, or we're going to set up a trap for whatever's running down the hallway, and they spend 30 minutes setting up netting to drop down on something that's never going to come. You know, that stuff happens all the time, and I think exactly what you say, it's when they don't have, you know, a specific reason to be doing something else, they don't have that baseline level of interest, they're going to do something else. But we've tracked our conversation somewhere off of game mechanics at some point, and we're going to get back onto it, because I'm going to tell one more thing with of course, Legend of the Five Rings. I'm not going to promise it's one more thing. I'll mention this system all day long. But when we're talking about using mechanics to tell a story, which is one of our big things, there is a mechanic in L5R that I am such a huge fan of that has been so hard to copy with any other system, and it's dueling. I mean, it's samurai culture, so dueling is something that happens between samurai, and obviously in other cultures you can do the glove slap and the pistol and all of that. But the interesting thing about dueling in Legend of the Five Rings, it's part of the social legal structure of the world of L5R. If 2 samurai have a dispute, they duel. Whoever wins the duel is legally right, and that is more enforceable than any kind of physical evidence, anything else. That is the ultimate form of law. And dueling is done to first blood. Now, this is a mechanic. There's mechanics in dueling, and dueling is completely separate from combat. You can have good duelists that are terrible in actual combat, vice versa, or that could be decent in both. It's its own mechanic, and dueling to first blood adds something to it. This is a tool I can use as a GM, and what it gives me is the ability to do player versus player. We can have conflict between players that can rise to a level of tension that they want to come to physical violence. It can be resolved without character death, and then socially they have to move on from it. So it is a mechanic that has given me this incredible ability to tell story because I can up the level of tension between PCs. I still want them generally working together. We want to engage that fellowship type of fun. And for the sake of telling a story, it's easier to have them together. But I can do more friction than in other systems because there is a mechanical way to give an outlet to it, to allow the players to do it. And that's one of the big things in L5R that I love so much about the system is I now have mechanics that I can run player versus player without destroying the group. And it's a mechanic that actually gives me that ability. So James, I wonder with all the different indie games and all of that you've played, I'm sure you've run into some interesting stuff. Aside from Feng Shui, of all these other, I'm especially interested in some of the smaller indie games that you've played, the 1 and 2 or 10-page RPGs. Which one kind of stands out for you in some of these unique mechanics?
The best designed role-playing system of all time, with mechanics that enforce the way the game should work and help create the mood. A game system that is so perfectly designed in all of the games that I've read and played. I've never encountered anything that goes after the genre that it's trying to do better, is called Dread. And Dread is a horror system that does not use dice. Instead, it uses a Jenga tower that sits in the middle of the table. And anytime you want to do something in the system, you pull a brick from the tower, and if the tower falls, you die. And the reason this system is so perfect is it enforces everything about the horror genre in how the game is played. Robin Laws and Kenneth Haidt on their wonderful podcast, Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, talk about the difficulty that a lot of people have in playing and running horror games, because that's an atmosphere that is really dependent on the player's buy-in to it. And because players are often joking around and not taking things seriously, the horror atmosphere can evaporate instantly. Because of Dread, and the way it works, you can joke all you want, but that tower is still sitting there being very unstable, reminding you that the next thing that you try to do could result in your grisly death. There is nothing that is more elegant in the simplicity and complexity of the mechanic. You simply have to be confident enough and good enough at Jenga, but at the same time, you're so amped up from the stakes of it, your hand is shaking almost every time you try and pull a brick from the tower. And you make all these jokes, but you still have to do it. And that's the best designed game system of all time. It's not my favorite, but I've never seen anything better.
That's wonderful. And the first thought I had as I go, this is going to be revealing of what kind of person I am. Of whenever I play Jenga, because I have an unnatural obsession with the game Jenga. I actually have 4 sets. I have 4 sets of Jenga in my closet right now. If anyone ever wanted to get me a gift and didn't know, buy me a set of Jenga. Cannot be knockoff. Has to be real Jenga. And no fancy stuff. I want the straight wooden blocks with that burned on image. But the first thing I do anytime I play a game of Jenga is I go to the very bottom and I take the bottom left piece off. Because I'm that kind of guy. Like, again, you want to say anything. And as soon as you start describing the system, I go, oh, I would have a choice to make, because if I do that, it makes the game so much harder, but yet it's only hurting myself. And just a little personal piece of me and my childhood was intrigued from that story you just told. I will definitely have to check out Dread.
If you're at Gen Con this year, I'll run a game of Dread for you. No problem. No questions asked.
Okay, no bump in the table. but it's such an elegant solution, because one of the issues, and I'm not a big horror player, I'm not a big fan of the genre, but one of the issues, and like you said, it's a common thing people always run into with the horror genre is, players taking it seriously. And like you say, to a degree, you need a large amount of player buy-in, but there's also a piece of psychology that you are directly fighting against, and that is human beings relieve tension and stress with comedy. That's what we like to do. When we are building up tension, I need it released. I need that tension gone. So even if you are doing everything right with the right players, everything in their mind is saying, crack a joke, it's getting too tense. Do something funny. Lean over in the chair and fart. It's getting too tense. Everything in their mind is saying that, and everyone else finds it more funny because they're in the same tense environment. And it makes it incredibly difficult, I feel, to run horror, because even with the player buy-in, it's the natural emotion for everyone to relieve that tension. Having the Jenga tower, it's you do the lean over in the chair and everyone cracks up, but then you got to pull a block still. That tension is going to immediately be built right back up. Oh, I'm in love with it. You're going to get me to play horror now. That's wonderful.
Everybody's going crazy over this. This is the first time I've ever heard this game. Love the mechanic. I mean, that is a brilliant mechanic. And everybody is just going crazy over wanting to play that, and they wish they were at Gen Con now.
Here's the thing about that system, too. It's a game system. Like, when I was giving people feedback on the 2-page tabletop contest, I was like, this is an example of perfect art. This is how a role-playing game fully supports its theme. I will say to the creators of Dread, they charge, I think, $15 to $20 for the physical book, and I feel like I need a physical copy of every book, and $2 for the PDF, because they tell you in, I'm going to say, around 50, 70 pages what could be expressed on a single sheet of paper. It could be a one-page role-playing system, but because they wanted to sell it and deserved to sell it, they expanded it into a 70-page book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's the again, my old writing teacher always used to tell me, the trick to good writing is saying things in the fewest number of words possible. And like you say, you got to sell a book, so I guess you slap 70 words on the table, but so much extra fluff that people add.
Yep.
I love it. I dig it. All right, let me ask you another thing. We're talking about game design. We're talking about different games. Again, I know you've played a number of these indie games doing one-shot podcasts, and I'm, to a degree, I guess I want to say, obsessed with that, because in the last 3 months, I've been on this huge kick of non-traditional gaming systems. And honestly, what's kicked this off, again, some of the people like Keegan that know me, I'm a big fan of WWE wrestling. It's such a wonderful show. It's so enjoyable. And there are, I actually have a long-running tabletop that I've had of my own system for doing professional wrestling, because I believe it is the perfect thing to do in tabletop. Everything. Between entrance music, between stories, between being able to do combat, and no one can ever die from it, so rivalries just build and build and build. It's perfectly designed for it. There's no good system out there I've ever found, because there's been a couple that have been put out, they try to use the traditional D20 system and add it into wrestling, and it's a whole bunch of crap you don't need for wrestling. So I've been looking at a whole bunch of different ways to approach games. So again, my own personal professional wrestling one is my own enjoyment from it. I've looked at games. The other one that's sort of kind of in pseudo development right now is a game that's based on being in an office environment and trying to work your way up through the chain, and your bonuses are based on how many motivational posters you have on the wall. And it's if you're in sales, you get negatives on Fridays because that's when the sales reports come out. And it's that type of wonderful cheeky fun. But I wonder what kind of what I would call, because Dread's such a great example, so now I'm asking for essentially example number 2 of non-traditional gaming systems, non-traditional environments, non-traditional, that gets away from the fantasy or the sci-fi that we see within your expansive knowledge, James, of all of the indie games. Have you ran into another one besides Dread? Now that I took the best example, that you really like because it was different.
Yeah, another one that is very close to Perfect Dark, and we've run it twice on the show now, and I can tell you I'm going to be running it a lot more in the future because of how much I love it. It's Everyone is John. It's a darling of r/RPG, but it takes this concept and really enforces the concept and makes a very interesting game experience that almost everybody that I've run it for, I don't think Kat would enjoy it unless we got really deep into it and like the psychological ramifications of these voices and whatnot. But like most people love that fluffy, crazy play style that it brings, and it's everybody playing the same character. That's bananas. It's completely out there. But it's also one that I feel like a lot of people know about. So one I'll say that I'm very excited to start playing soon on the show is called Endragor, or I don't actually know how to pronounce it. It's a fate-based role-playing system, but it is a dark fantasy system that bases the mythology for it not on Western mythology, but on native cultures that almost never appear in role-playing except as a pastiche. So you have Native American mythology, you have Aboriginal mythology, you have a lot deeper Celtic lore. So it's made out of all these cool mythologies that exist in the world that just don't appear in role-playing games because white people don't learn about them in school. So I'm really interested in that.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. It's a goddamn white man holding back role-playing.
Okay, that's so that's an interesting one you like for that. One of the others that popped to my mind, I love Everyone's John. That's our standard. We don't regularly play it. What we do is that is our road trip game that we play.
I can see that.
Phenomenal for that. And like I said, going back from Ohio to Maryland's about 9 hours, and we can normally kill about half of that with a couple good. Everyone is John, and we just have one tray for the D6, and it's all good to go. Love that for the road trip game. One of the other ones, it's a game that I saw you play on One Shot that I was really interested in just because the concept to me was great. All Out of Bubblegum. Was it?
Oh yeah, it's by the same people.
Is it?
That's why you like it so much. The same designer worked on that. They had this wonderful little roleplay site called Sandor at the Zoo, and they hosted it through a university server. And this very year, the university stopped supporting the site. While Everyone is John is sort of a darling of the adventurous gaming crowd, All Out of Bubblegum was just like this afterthought made by the same people. So it is not reproduced in as many places. I have saved the complete rules for that. So if anybody needs that, just contact me on Twitter, and I will tweet out the link to you. It's a wonderful gaming system. It's absolutely wonderful.
I wonder, is there within the official rules, is there any kind of, because like I know obviously the story that you did on One Shot, the wonderful, it started out of course running through the airport, and I was immediately hooked with this system and this sort of built-in build-up of tension that comes from it, and I like that as well. Does it specify any sort of setting or what type of game or anything to run with that within the official rules, or is it kind of like Everyone's John, if you can run whatever you want?
In the official rules, it says come up with your own damn setting. So it's like imposes this thing, and the mechanics are so light you could play. I think when I first posted the episode, one of the things people said about it is, I love these mechanics because you could change it, instead of kicking ass, you could change it to like a sanity-based system and play like a Lovecraftian version of it. So I think there's a lot that you can do with that rule set of like roll under, roll over. I mean, like obviously Lasers and Feelings took that, but having that scale slide to create, tension in the story.
Yeah, I said I found that a real interesting story as you get the build up to it, and I really, like I said, the simple elegant mechanics are wonderful, and now I kind of wonder, talking with obviously I know you started 3.5. Keegan's a big 3.5 Pathfinder. I'm actually one of the last proponents.
Whoa! Let's not just be throwing labels around, okay?
I've been labeling you all day. You know this.
Because if you want to talk about. We can talk about my favorite stuff later, but don't be throwing around labels just arbitrarily like that, okay?
Well, okay.
I feel a little bit offended by you just saying that.
I finally offended you? Man, it only took me like almost 2 hours. I'll have to try harder next time. But we all have played sort of the standard D&D. And I was about to say, I'm the last proponent of 4th edition in the world. I hold 4th edition is a good system. Not only do I hold it's a good system, I hold it's a good system for beginners, and I can feel the hate coming at me, and bring it on. I love it.
Yeah, but most of it has come from me. But it's continue.
But the where I was going with this is these are all traditionally rules heavy system. Yeah, there's GURPS and all that are much more rules heavy, and some people get offended saying D&D 3 or 3.5 is rule heavies. But compared to where the genre has gone, these are all very rules heavy systems. There's a lot of there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can do in character creation. There's all your encumbrance rules. You've got all this stuff, and then at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have like some of the most basic game systems there is. Everyone is John. I mean, it almost doesn't get simpler from a mechanical structure than Everyone is John. For those aren't familiar, Google it. In 30 seconds, you'll have read all the rules to it, and go have fun for the rest of your life, every single road trip. Where do you come down with sort of both Keegan and you, James, on these, rules heavy system like a traditional D&D, a traditional Pathfinder, versus these incredibly rules light that are almost more, dare I say, concepts than an actual sequence of rules?
I gotta say I love them all, and I love them all for different reasons.
Oh my word! That's what a parent says to their kids. Like that's like what a parent has all their kids together.
It is a cop-out answer, but I deeply love every aspect of role playing. I love power gaming because when I search through 10 different 3.5 books to find, the 2 right rules interaction to make a near infinite loop, I feel like I'm a goddamn wizard. It's like actually being the character searching through forbidden books of lore to find a completely powerful object. It's very thrilling. And I am also a huge story nerd, and I love to have stories that are meaningful with character development that's interesting, that I can look back at the game after it's over and go, yeah, we actually told an interesting story. And I love these pulpy little asides. I love Everyone is John because of how much gleeful fun I have when I'm playing it. It's always a wild ride, and like I can spend 16 hours having my private version of fun looking through all the books just to build a character, and I can also spend 30 minutes having a fun round of Everyone is John, laughing my head off. I love all of that, and that's why I'm trying to do this shit for a living, because I love it.
Keegan, what about you? Where you come down on it?
Yeah, I think honestly is you can find gems and aspects in all of them that you really appreciate. If obviously you'll have favorites, you'll have particular interests in one or another, and generally you will kind of settle in on a game that fits your preferred style, or maybe perhaps the style you enjoy most. Like food, you can have a wide variety of food, but there's a couple that you'll go back and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to sit down and really enjoy this, and your eyes kind of roll back in your head. So it's the same thing with the game. You're like, oh yeah, this is the one where you have to like unbutton your pants and just take another scoop and helping of it because you love the system so much. But we all go to McDonald's still, right? So there's nothing wrong with there's still nothing wrong with playing games that it's not the best, but it's still really engaging and fun. My preference is way, way, way off board. So far off board, there's no dice or rules or anything to it. That's where I actually come from. I started doing that in junior high, where there were no dice, no rules, me and two people. We played for an entire.
That's called improv.
Seventh
or
grade.
Being alive.
But we still had the structure, I guess you can call it, of it's a fantasy world, and they still had to do that or had to live in it and engage with it. But we still kept the story going, and there's a lot more trust involved. And I think a lot of these rule-heavy things have more to do with trust than trying to have interesting mechanics. And that's kind of where I get hung up on. That it's like, I don't mind if you want to add these rules, but it's almost like you're trying to build trust into your system. And I could be completely wrong, because maybe I'm just so far on one side of the spectrum. That maybe it kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes. But honestly, 4th edition's not my favorite, but there are some really great mechanics in it if you want to get really gamey. And if that's what you want to do, it's fun. Then there's all these crazy things. I've never played Everybody's John, but now I want to play that and buy a Jenga set and play Dread. So, I mean, there's like...
You gotta play Dread.
Oh,
boy.
I'm so excited to play it. I don't know how or when, but I really want to play Dread now. I kept on looking it up, like, as you were talking, and everybody's feeding me ideas, and I'm like, oh, yes, I want to play this.
Okay, well, I'll give you, I guess, my opinion here right before, because we got about just a couple minutes left as we're wrapping up here. But I sort of have, I guess, a different approach. I mean, I think ultimately what James said correct, but if there's anything about me is I have to categorize everything in black and white. Shades of gray, not a fan of it. So it's either this or it's that. And if I got to pick one of the others, I actually land on the other side of you, Mr. Keegan. I like a system that has more rules than a system that has less rules. and the reason being, not just to be argumentative to Mr. Keegan. There is actually another reason, although that is an added benefit. But the thing is, if they're designed correctly, because rules that are designed correctly, what they are doing is giving opportunity and giving ability to tell better story. And the more that you have that are accurately and well designed, the better and more stories you can tell. It's why I hold L5R is such a great system. It's honestly that some of it's the rules, some of it's the dueling mechanics, some of it's the social combat that you get to do on it. But the big thing about L5R, I grab any one of these books, Book of Air here, I actually looked at that before the podcast. When I pick up that book, it is 180 pages of lore, it's a supplement book, and 20 pages of mechanics. Because the lore is actually the game itself. Now, the mechanics are really good because I've got 8 different clans, I've got a whole bunch of other species, I've got this massive list of lore and rules, and all of that, because they're so well crafted, gives me the ability to expand more of what my stories. It gives my players more ability to expand, and ultimately what I'm going for, my ultimate fun, the best fun I can ever have, I can't do it in a one-shot. I can't do it in 4 play sessions. I need to build for a year to that finale of finales. And my apex pinnacle of tabletop is when I get to do these yearly finales of finales, and all of the stories that have been told up until that point come to a head. Anyone who's watched Game of Thrones knows this and can appreciate it. First book, first season, it's great. Everything continues to build to these big, huge peaks. You could not appreciate how good the Red Wedding was in book 1. You could not do it because you don't have enough appreciation for what's happened. And to build up to that level takes time, and I have issues with the simpler system being able to hold people, character, and story interest long enough for a year, for 50 play sessions with that. Again, I'm not saying it can't be done. I think there are definitely systems where it can be done well. There are GMs and players where it can be done expertly and have all of that. I personally, myself, and with the majority of people I find, it's easier to hold someone's attention for 50 play sessions if they have more options as players than less options. And that is why I come down on that side of it. That's
really interesting. I like a lot about that. I think it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish in a game. Like if I'm trying to tell a good horror story, I gotta use Dread because it's simply the best system there is for it. If I want a really tactical system, Shadowrun, man. Shadowrun's fucking great. And one of the reasons I love those rules-heavy systems, which I liked that you said that about rules-heavy. I think making a system that has specific combat rules for how you want to play actually makes your choice to play that way more important.
Yes.
I look at Dungeon World, it creates no difference between 2-weapon fighting and like 1-weapon fighting for most characters. But Shadowrun, that's like huge. So I like having rules that support the choices the party is going to make.
Okay, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are at our 2-hour mark, which is an hour past our first hour mark. So we are going to call it. This has been Fear the Sun podcast on the GM Academy, formerly the Roll20 GM Academy. Please come check out our website, yourgmacademy.com. It is the big official launch. Of course, these podcasts will be regular, recurring. Thank you so much to James Damato for coming here. It has been a wonderful, lovely discussion. Hopefully we didn't scare you away for the future.
But absolutely not.
His show is One Shot Podcast, as well as he does Critical Success on Peaches and Hot Sauce. I could not personally highly recommend it enough. It is absolutely phenomenal. All right, I have been Jim McClure. That has been Keegan, the architect of the GM Academy, and of course, special guest James Damato. We will see you all at the table next week.
Thank you, guys.